Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the new Discord discussions. Today, we have an interesting topic that was brought on from a conversation ML and I were having yesterday. And it's one of those things that I don't think people really consider often enough. Because everybody talks about freedom, right? I'm free to do this, I'm free to do that, and we live in freedom, and, we're free to be this and the third. And I don't disagree, but freedom also comes with responsibility. Because freedom, in and of itself, if it was absolute and there were no boundaries for the freedom, we'd live in anarchy, and that's untenable in how we survive as a society. So our current model of freedom looks similar to some, and again, this is my opinion entirely. The freedom we possess is only limited to when it affects someone else. So our freedom is only really limited in the US based on, okay, with what you're doing, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else, affect somebody else. I mean, but that's so vague. I'm going to pose this question to each of you independently. And I'm going to start with Fly, because Fly's got a unique perspective. And he back, I think Fly stepped away for a second. Um, but I'll start with Phil then. Uh, that way we can kind of loop around. Freedom, Phil, in its most raw sense, what is your take on freedom? You hear the word freedom versus responsibility. What do you think?
I mean, right off the top of the head, I think
Yeah.
of the the movie Braveheart, uh, screaming freedom, of course, and so there's the connotative that runs with that. Um, but I think freedom is it's up to your own interpretation because if you were in the 1800s, freedom is uh, heck, who knows, right? Today, freedom
Not
is
being a serf.
yeah, and
Right.
today is freedom of what is that? Oh, we don't want to we want to be able to be financially free, and I think that's like if especially if you're in the entrepreneur space, you hear I want to be financially free, and so that's like there are a lot of different gradients of free, and it changes over time. But I think free in general means the option to choose without external consequence.
That
But like if you step inside in front of a truck and the
eh,
truck's going 60 miles an hour, you're going to get hit because there are it's not like mandated consequences. Like if I spit on a sidewalk in California, I'm going to get a ticket. Where that's not free. You should be able to do that, but then people should be able to call you out on it and embarrass you. It's the same reason you can't get a ticket for. Uh, I'm trying to think of something you can't get a ticket for, or you can't get in trouble for by the government. But and the government is just an example. You get in trouble by somebody
it's a limiting
without there
body.
being, yeah, without there being a consequence. Um, yeah, maybe ML can
Well,
jump on this train.
I don't want to get him yet because he talks a lot. So I want to get to him last. Don't shake, don't laugh. It's
Don't
true.
don't don't uncork me yet.
Yeah, we're not ready to uncork
but
Chris
it,
yet.
I'm
Fly, I'm
I'm
going to grab
I'm
you now. That's
I
all
am
you've
I
got
am
back.
limited by the English language at the current moment, trying to delineate it a
Articulate.
little bit. Yeah.
It's all good, man.
I'm just thinking about Singapore. I think my bit is going to be about Singapore.
Okay, so Fly, freedom. What is? You've got a unique story to tell because you're going to change the topic somewhat, I'm sure. Go ahead, Fly.
Okay. All right. But hey, freedom. Let me read this quote. This in my book, chapter 8, by freedom. And I've quoted: "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." Now let me flip that quote. I was incarcerated. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I'm telling. I have a great story, man, that should be told. And that's why I wrote a book about my life. I was incarcerated for almost 6 years flat in prison of the rebellion that took away my freedom. Is that like the opposite of what I just quoted? But doing time physically in a controlled environment where they tell you when to go to sleep, what time to go to sleep, what time to wake up. You have to stay clean shaven. You work for free. Everything was done without without any freedom or freedom of choice with your own, not only your physical body, but your mental, your emotional, psychological as well. But in that confinement, when I was incarcerated, I became so totally free, even though they had me physically. I was mentally, purely free for the first time in my life. Meaning that everything that was that was negative about where I was at, I turned it around. I went to school. I got 2 college degrees while I was down there. I got a college trade as well. I wrote a book. I became a pillar of the. I was on the trustee camp. I became the Mr. Know It All, or Mr. Guy who people come to they needed to talk to. Um, I became free. I became free of my body. I worked out. I did better habits. Still do the same routine. I've been home many years, man, over 2 decades now. I'm still doing the same routine I did over 20 years ago. I still live by that mindset. And so freedom to me is so many different concepts of what you think free is. Right today we have freedom of speech, they say, but it's really not freedom of speech. You can say anything, but you can't say anything because they have this thing called cancel culture. I know. I'm on YouTube. I'm a vlogger on YouTube. I've been my station. I got hit twice, especially when the pandemic was out. There's no freedom of speech anymore. Uh, we was talking earlier about females. If they wear something that's maybe a little scantily, but they want to be free with what they're wearing, right? But you have to deal with the consequences. You got
So
to deal
that's
with the
that
rebellion,
responsibility.
the responsibility and the rebellion that can come from you being rebellious in your freedom. There are consequences in freedom.
You're
And
right.
I leave on the note, man.
So that's a whole different take on freedom. So I'm going to now ML freedom.
Yeah. So, million different directions to go with it. The thing that I'm thinking about is just the relationship between, like, freedom is a word that, in my, I don't have any data for this, but just in my estimation, freedom gets used more by conservatives um, in North America than by liberals. Just as a word that's like that's commonly referenced and used in their speeches and stuff like that. I think that conservatives, like that Vice video I showed you of the big Sandy shoot, the big shoot in Arizona, where it's that big conservative gun club shoot, and it's just like, um, it's and all those conservative guys were talking about freedom, 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 freedom. Like every other word was freedom. Conservatives really love the word freedom, but there's an interesting, the thing I note, and I'm not trying to make an argument or a point, but I guess just my observation is like that the more conservative you get and traditional, as far as I can see, the less freedom you have. And so, like I said, I was thinking about Singapore. So Singapore, and I was thinking of like comparing Singapore with San Francisco or Singapore with Vancouver, where I live. Um, they're all coastal portside cities. They all have roughly the same populations. Things get very different after that. Um, if you take a walk around Singapore, you're going to be very hard pressed to find homeless people, to find garbage on the streets, graffiti, dilapidated anything. It's an open drug use, public intoxication, people just being crazy dickheads in pub. You don't really see any of that in Singapore. And The reason is because if you do any of those things, you will get caned and or killed. So another example would be the Asia region in Indonesia, which is like Singapore is an independent city-state. The Asia region in Indonesia is an autonomous state that is run with Sharia law, explicit Sharia law with religious enforcers walking around making sure. And that region is well known for being pretty much drug-free, relatively crime-free, very orderly, very clean. But Sharia law. So now, then you compare those situations with its like, so the benefit is obvious. You have a well-ordered, beautiful city like Singapore. So let's just go back to Singapore because it's more on point. So you've got a beautiful, well-ordered city that that has enormous investment potential. And one of the main reasons for that is because of how well run and orderly it is and how criminality has very little presence there. Now compare that to San Francisco. Compare that to San Francisco. What investment opportunities are there? Like, what businesses are looking to move in to San Francisco right now? Oh, right, none. What people are moving in? Who's visiting there? And what's it like, most importantly? Walk around San Francisco right now. Well, I haven't been there for 15 years. I was there before all this happened. I remember what it used to look like. And now I watch videos on YouTube of just guys walking around, like the Tenderloin. And I'm like, well, I know, I'm like, that looks like the downtown east side of Vancouver. And you know what city doesn't have that equivalent? Singapore. Neither does Tokyo, for the record. And Japan is a very traditional, conservative society. So, to me, there's an interesting. I think that there's so much packed into the word freedom that I think that, for example, a lot of conservatives, I think, are surprised when you tell them, like, you could totally intuition pump them. You can lead them with breadcrumbs to this so easily, but to a sucker punch. But it's stupid. But I mean, you could just say, because it's just the ignorance of, like, you say to them, like, you just average conservative on the street. What do you think the most what's the freest state possible? What's that called? Like, there's a state of being, Texas. Not in heaven but on earth. Yeah, and not a state what's the freest state possible? They might answer something like Texas. Thinking themselves clever, but also thinking, well, that's basically the answer. The answer is as least laws as possible. And then you tell them it's anarchy.
Well, yeah, that's what happens when you have
conservatives. Now, how do conservatives react to the word anarchy?
There's always a negative connotation.
Really negatively. Yeah. The leftists are the only ones that have an ambiguous reaction to anarchy because maybe they've heard that Noam Chomsky is a crypto-anarchist or something like that. So they're like, well, theoretically, when we're all gods, we'll have a state of anarchy because we'll all be perfect and we won't need laws to police each other anymore. But that's so impossibly distant into the future that it has no bearing or relevance on today's world. So why even bring it up? So anyway, I guess my main point would be, I think that freedom is a word that people should think about, be them conservative, liberal, whatever, wherever you fall on the political side of things, because I think that when you think about freedom, you're going to discover that it has some aspects to it that you're not going to like, that your gut emotional reaction is going to be negative to, and then you realize that you have some biases and that the word itself contains more than you think it does.
Now I'm going to jump in here at this point, and now we're going to add responsibility. Because this is a freedom versus responsibility. Because I think the responsibility portion of it comes...
That's what we're talking about with Singapore, right?
Right,
and
yeah.
Asia.
Yep. So
That's
let me
exactly it. Yeah.
now we're gonna unpack it into the Western world, as we don't live with Sharia law and we don't cane and kill people as the first response to something you're not supposed to do. Um,
Well, certain things, like if you're caught
now,
carrying too many drugs
yeah. So
in Singapore, auto death sentence.
yeah. So there's some interesting things in the past that we can kind of talk about, and I want each person to add to the responsibility question. Um, Responsibility and responsible freedom, right? So your freedom is only as far as your responsibility for your actions go. So I'm going to use the Old West for a minute, right? People were relatively respectful to one another. People were also kinder and also more malevolent. But there was an immediate response to bad behavior by the town, by the people, and the local sheriff, as it were. But if you offended someone too much, they'd kill you because they had guns. And unless you were a better fighter or a better gunman, you generally curtailed your freedoms, hashtags, with the responsibility that someone could hold you accountable for your behavior. So freedom has the
But if you were a
limitation of
really
account.
good gunfighter or
You
swordsman, you could be a massive dick and go around provoking duels and then legally murdering people,
Doc
which
There's
was a thing
also
Holliday,
that happened a
Doc,
lot.
there's
Doc Holliday.
but then there's also the long gun.
Eh,
So like like in movies, there's always the better gunman that that could
Fast draw.
It was more
that
with
doesn't happen.
swords. Like with rapiers, you
But even then
really
it didn't
saw
work
some
because then
dickheads with
bows
rapiers.
because then bows.
Them.
It's like
No,
only
but you
when
don't
honor
duel.
abounds.
You don't duel with a bow. Yeah, but like honor, like we're talking
Yeah,
like.
they didn't care. If someone was just around
But
killing
like, think
people,
about it
they
in the
would get a firing squad of bows and walk up to you and just shoot you down.
Well, sure, but that's a crazy murderer. I'm talking about somebody operating within legally murdering people. Well, it's not murder because murder is illegal. Legally killing people
Yeah.
and getting not only getting away with it, but like it's totally fine. It's actually praised.
Well,
Like
you're talking. So there's two different
there's a
types.
movie
There's like
called there's a movie called The Duelists. It was, I
Mhm.
believe, Ridley Scott's first movie with Harvey Keitel, um, and it's about it's a true story about these two guys who kept dueling each other over honor actually with rapiers and pistols back in the 17th century in the French army. And the one guy in particular, played by Harvey Keitel's character, was renowned. Like oh God, I forgot how many hundreds of duels he fought in his life, and he always won. And the guy he was known for being a massive prick, but because he was so good with a rapier and so good and back then they were just using like the
The
ball and powder flintlocks, right? So
not very
yeah,
accurate gun.
very easy to have a pistol duel and have neither side fatally wounded. The rapier duels were more deadly. Yeah, and so like the problem with that system is that if you get somebody who's a master with those weapons, and those are the traditional dueling weapons, then that guy can be as big a prick as he wants and get away with it.
So my point in bringing up the Old West was there was an immediate responsibility for your actions. It wasn't this. I got to go get the judge, right? So the judge was 2 weeks
I have to go get
away.
the authority.
Right. So the authority was the community, and the community, if you had a local drunk, they'd throw him in the jail for a period of time until he got sober. And more than likely, the preacher would come talk to him. His family, if they were still around, would have a talk to him. There was a general accounting in an attempt to curtail the behavior. But responsibility, I think, is hand in hand with freedom, because your freedom should only extend as far as you can be held accountable for your behavior, right? So the responsibility comes of freedom, that it has a price 100% of the time. A lot of people have died to have the level of freedom we have here, the experiment of America, the idea that we're going to have checks and balance and we're going to essentially agree on a set of rules that everyone's going to live by so that we can have the maximum level of freedom without imposition on someone else. So I'm going to go to Fly now for his take on responsibility in relationship to freedom. All right, you there, Fly? You got your mic muted. He might be stepped away, so I'll grab Phil.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Fly.
Responsible.
Responsibility in equation to freedom.
Man, they go hand in hand because
like you got incarcerated, right?
Freedom comes with a lot of responsibility.
So here I'm going to frame this question a little bit for you because I want to bring this into the discussion because I think it's important. So you were free to do whatever it was that got you incarcerated. The accounting for that freedom was the responsibility toll that was paid. 6 years of your life, you weren't free. So that, I think, has to be brought to... Hold on, I want him to talk.
Yeah, but is that... To me, that's a consequence. That's not a responsibility. Like, to me, responsibility is like...
He was held responsible for what he did.
Oh, okay, held responsible. Okay, I guess it works in that sense.
And coming home after being incarcerated to continue to have doing the right things. I was responsible to do the right things.
So, yeah, go ahead. I'll let you talk.
Oh, yeah, because you have to behave yourself in prison, of course.
And then you're on parole afterward.
Yeah, afterwards, it's a double-edged sword. You know, since I've been home over 20 years, but I have a bachelor's, I have an MBA, I have a master's. I've written 3 books. I've been on podcasts. I've been college graduate keynote speakers. I felt that was my responsibility. That's how I was thinking, to even things up with the things that I did that caused me to lose my freedom. So responsibility and freedom, because we can do whatever we think we can do whatever we want to do, but in a nutshell, we can't. Can you imagine if America was like Singapore? Would there be crimes? Can you imagine?
There'd be crime, but I mean, it would be a different. It's hard.
If you stole something like Islam,
it's hard to even imagine.
Yeah, you get your hands cut off when you steal something, and wow.
Let's slow that down. They can move Walmart back to San Francisco then.
Yeah. If you cheat on your wife or you cheat on your husband, you get 100 lashes on your back in front of every. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, and the funny thing is,
but is it?
The more things get worse and deteriorate in the West, the more that those crazy, restrictive, traditional, conservative systems actually start to look
appealing.
Like they have some, they start to look appealing, which is why we're seeing.
I'm gonna
like
jump
Islam
in.
is the fastest growing religion in the world and the largest religion in the world for a reason.
So I'm gonna
bring Islam. I studied Islam for 6 years. I've been an imam. I know how to speak a little bit of Arabic and everything. So yes.
Okay, so you can actually read the Quran in its.
Yes.
I've heard you have to read it in its original.
Yes.
So interestingly enough, right? I'm gonna jump in here for a second because Fly brought up, and so did Chris, a really interesting point that I'm gonna get to Phil, that I think is very interesting, and it just occurred to me: is it plausible that we have a faction of our political group that is wanting to create so much anarchy and so much freedom, as it were, to where we'll willingly accept slavery to stop the anarchism, that will willingly go under tyranny because eventually they'll be the ones that's going to stop the anarchist or the absolute freedomist, and instead of having
seems to be
it was absolutely
that's what keeps happening.
Well, it was absolutely executed. No, it was executed in 2020, where in 2019 there was 200 riots across the United States, all with the idea that if Donald Trump gets fucking elected, we're gonna burn the place down. So I can't
a bunch of Antifa stuff.
Yeah, I can't not believe that after that practical application of anarchy in a governed
It's an example.
society. Yeah, it's
It's
an
an
example
example.
of
Like,
success where
do you want
freedom,
more of this?
right, or you let us control you and then this doesn't happen. And it's like, whoa, that's such a crazy idea. And when you
Well,
guys
the
said
strong
that,
man.
yeah,
It's the right wing strongman. The right wing strongman rises up in response to a society that has fallen to a certain level of chaos due usually to leftist liberal policies, and then it just hits some invisible threshold where
right,
some critical mass that can't be measured but exists is reached, and the populace rises up, enough of them
and I'm done.
rise up and say, I'm done, I need order, I'll pay any cost. This guy seems like he's gonna like go get those sons of bitches that are burning down courthouses.
And
Like you're not gonna elect some panty waste.
that's how
Like, right?
Putin came into being.
That's how all of them come into being. That's how Bolsonaro down in Brazil. That's how what's his dude in El Salvador right now. All
Right.
of them, every single one. The table is set by the liberal leftist socialist policies that result in a collapsed economy and a bunch of gangs running out of control. Like Mexico's next.
Yeah. So that responsibility, again, it's interesting. Too much freedom is a bad thing. But I'm going to grab
It's a
some.
balance,
Yeah.
yeah. I
So
mean,
Phil,
we'll pause on that because what you said is kind of like, I think, like, too much freedom is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, responsibility is the natural
counterbalance. Yeah.
And it actually, oddly enough, I'll tell a brief anecdote from my own life. I think that like freedom is better when it's a bit precious. You don't want too much freedom. About 7 years ago now, I had a job, IT job, got laid off, got handed 15 grand to walk away because the manager didn't like me, but I was a model employee, so he couldn't, he just had to pay me out. And so I could go on employment. And so because of that, I could go on employment insurance for the max for a full year, which covered all my expenses and left a little bit over for some fun. And I was like, well, shit, I've been working my whole life since I was 18. I never even take vacation. Why don't I just take the year off and just have some fun? And so I did. And the first 6 months were great. I was gardening, I was writing, I was playing lots of video games, I was smoking a little too much pot. And then the last 6 months, I sunk into one of the deepest depressions of my life, and I was not getting anything done. And it reminded me of that Muse line, like my freedom started to consume itself. And I would wake up, and because my day had no structure, had no demands of responsibility besides only the most minor ones of like doing dishes and laundry and groceries, which are nothing. It actually became that my free time, it almost became oppressive. And now that I'm 7 years back, working full time again, I'll never take a year off from work again. Yeah. Unless the year off is to like do a thing that's gonna set me for life. Like, so it's work of a different sort.
Yeah.
It shocked me. I thought that I could apply myself the necessary structure, have the internal resources to make good use of that year that I had. Because some people could. Some people, they get that year and they'll make all their life's ambitions come true. But I think those people are pretty rare, and I think those people are already doing it. I don't think they need the year. They'll just find the time, right? Like, what's his name? Sylvester Stallone wrote Rocky while working 2 jobs, and he was so broke he had to sell his dog. He still found time to write Rocky. So, it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, too much freedom. And now that I'm working 40 hours a week, now my free time doesn't feel oppressive anymore. Now it feels awesome. So yeah, it's like too much freedom definitely is a bad thing. There's no question.
Phil, responsibility.
Oof.
Yeah, the young guy, the young 25-year-old. What does he know about responsibility? And the thing is, I'm going to set Phil up a little bit.
He sounds more responsible than me, to be honest.
I know. So, actually, Phil, takes care of his family. Like he is literally the responsible one in his family. So
Yeah, exactly.
go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, so I was sitting here writing. I went all the way back from Singapore, but I'll work my way in reverse. You're talking about responsibility, and well, responsibility creates power, right? And then if there are corrupt people, then it attracts corruption, and that's just how it goes. But you can take like the start of responsibility where it's good and healthy, and you can take it all the way to the Chinese financial tracker, which is like a point by point basis. If you're too low, you can't buy water type of shit. And then there's the act of being free, which you could say that's kind of like the catty corner of on the same catty corner as freedom, or the ideology of freedom, where free is at least by definition and in my mind, and even in history, it's the free from responsibility and law-based consequences, which would be like if I ran a company and I was not adherent to common law or commercial law. It'd be like if any of us were not
So if you were
compliant.
a typical CEO now.
Well, no, because they're using maritime.
Oh,
So,
sorry.
no.
I was just thinking
Yeah.
in terms of CEOs like always looking to cut corners and always
Yeah,
being
so
kind of shady
that-
with the law.
Yeah, so if you want to be shady with the law, there are shipping companies that offload their cargo offshore, so it only goes in through the international board transfer. So basically, you only get taxed once when you enter the U.S. rather than being multiple times if they go through the Panama Canal. Long story, but it's actually cheaper to do that and offload from one ship to another ship than it is to actually take it into port. But anyway, and then there's like freedom can be a force for living rights, which like if you're for like human rights, like if you're a living man or a living woman, the power to do the thing of their choice without hindrance juxtaposed to having consequences. So it's like this two-sided fact in my mind when it comes to freedom, where if you're too free, you have people streaking the sidewalk, and then on the other hand, you have people who can't buy water if they don't follow the rules, so to speak. And so you
Or
could say
think
there
a
is,
certain way.
yeah, so there is,
Get executed for being homosexuals.
yeah, or get executed because there are a lot of reasons you could get executed in specific scenarios across the world in history. And so you could say freedom is the ability to choose to be in the position you want to be in under the amount of rule you want to be under. And I still go back to give unto Caesar what is Caesar, i.e., if you live in a land, you follow its rules because that's where you choose to live. But most, if not some of us...
Do you choose when you're born into it, though?
No, but you should have the... Well, you should have the ability to work your way out of a system you don't want to be in. And so, like, if I wanted to move to Argentina where there's no extradition, not saying I'm doing anything, I'm just saying if I wanted to move to Argentina...
Hail Hitler!
Well, I would need... I would need
Brazil.
I would need some more financial backing and to move there, as well as I would jump through a lot of hoops in order to actually buy land there. And so there's all these barriers like citizenship and whatnot to move to a country that I'm just using Argentina as a reference to say that maybe they have the laws that I'm looking for, instead of just fixing where I'm at. But then there's the station of saying, well, shouldn't you fight against what you don't believe in the place that you currently exist? And the answer is yes. And so there's this constant battle back and forth. And I think if one was without the other, it's like saying if nothing was bad in life, like everything went the way it was supposed to go, everything would be extremely boring, because then we would never actually make mistakes, which means we wouldn't actually learn anything, and we would just go through life perfectly fine. Everything we did would happen and work, and that would be extremely boring, and you wouldn't be happy at all. So you need one with the other in order to counterbalance them for one to be valuable. It's like if gold was in mass supply and we never used gold for anything, then gold would have no value. And so that's where, like, when you talk about freedom and you talk about responsibility and how do they coincide with each other.
So I'm going to jump in here for a minute, and
I'm writing in the chat
I
based on what
know,
you're saying. Yeah.
I know, I see that. I appreciate that. Um, Here's a thought to consider. When he brought up gold, something just kind of jumped into my mind, and it said that gold is a shiny metal, right? We make jewelry out of it. It's kind of dense and heavy, but everybody just agreed that gold had a value.
Hmm.
Without everybody agreeing that gold had a value, it's just a metal, right? So,
There's something about gold. I would compare it to how crows like shiny
right.
objects.
But my
There's something about how it interfaces with our eyes and our brains at a deep level that we like.
yeah,
Clearly, because it's like across all the
I
cultures.
know. So there is something about that occurred to me that was
It's not rational.
universal. Well, hold on.
It's just some accident,
But
but
we
it's
all
there.
but we all agree.
100%. Oh God, yeah.
So we all agree on something that's valuable, and almost every living being wants to be free. We all agree. Like no one once says, "Man, I wish I would somebody would oppress me." Like said no one. But then you also have to consider the Helsinki syndrome, where people become comfortable with being oppressed. Our biggest
Well,
biological
that was
value.
that's
Hold on,
that's
hold
like
on.
an adaptation to being a hostage. I mean, it.
But here's the thing, though: our malleability as a species, we can live under basically any condition. We had people survive Auschwitz. Okay, we had people survive.
People are really tough.
Yes, right, and regardless of their level of freedom, right, we'll adapt to it. But we all agree we want freedom more than we want oppression. But
Well, I don't know.
somewhere,
They
some
have this thing called institution,
yeah,
and
institutionalization. Yeah,
yeah, it's people,
they'd rather be
people,
in jail.
men or female, who has been institutionalized, physical freedom taken away from them, and that's all they know. They get out here, quote unquote, to the free world and cannot adapt.
Can't survive. Did you see the movie
Because they've
Shawshank Redemption?
adapted. I'd about to say, yeah.
The Shawshank Redemption, the one dude that was the
Yeah, the
librarian,
hung
right?
yourself.
The
Yeah,
one guy, the old guy who got out, right, after serving like 50 years in jail, and he was the guy that took everybody books. He was the librarian, and the
he was
old dude,
somebody.
right? But
Yeah,
he got out in the world and just he was a nobody. He would had no attention, no affection. Nobody talked to him. He was of
He was
no
bagging
value.
bagging
Yup, and getting
groceries,
yelled at
and getting yelled at
by
by a guy half his age, and
yup.
just
You're
yeah.
you're jumping into the realm of what people want, which is they want to feel wanted and included in circles of people. And so in that case, yes, he felt like he was an outsider, and what he came from was better than where he was. And so that's
Yeah, because
that.
inside he was
Even
like
though he had no freedom.
Morgan Freeman's character said it. Like inside, he was a learned and educated man.
Yeah.
He was one of the smartest and most educated men in the prison. He was part of Red's system of distribution of illegal goods. So he was like he had
Valuable.
protection. Nobody touched him. He had his own space. He had his pet. He had special protection from the warden. Like he had it. Basically, he was one of those cases where now I think someone like that, there'd be a good chance that if he asked for it, he'd be allowed to keep living in the prison for the rest of his life if he wanted to, but he just wouldn't be a prisoner. He would just be like the
resident.
librarian, basically. Yeah, who would just get a little stipend. Because I would hope that would happen now, because, yeah, what happened to him. And it would have happened in the movie anyways. Morgan Freeman's character goes through the exact same thing towards the end, works at the exact same grocery store, and
Get busy living or get busy dying.
and he says all he's thinking about is ways to break his parole so that he can get back sent back to where things make sense. And the only reason that he didn't do that or kill himself is because of a promise that he made to Andy Dufresne. And that promise that's responsibility. You made that commitment. You have a responsibility to Andy to go find that tree. and he does and finds the money and then goes finds Andy and it all works out. So yeah, if it like the absolute to go from a life of bars and the strictest regime and rules possible where you have absolute structure and then suddenly you're tossed out into like the freest most capitalist society ever, and it's just like, okay, now go make your own way with no skills and you're an ex-con so no one will hire you and you're old.
Good luck.
Bye.
And it really is their heart, dude. It really is their heart because
I can't imagine. I can only try.
After you do time, after you so-called pay your debt to society, they say, you come out here and you can't get a job because you're an ex-felon.
Which
society give you all these banana pills, this roll of banana pills to stay out. It's harder if you don't have a support system and just conscious and discipline and staying free, physical freedom. You're going back in, dude.
I've never ever. I tried having this conversation once at a workplace with a couple of women, and I stopped immediately because I could sense like, oh my god, oh wow, like to the women I've spoken to about the issue of hiring somebody with a criminal record. They
will
all
work hard for you, man. They will work hard.
I'm pro. I think it's insane that criminals aren't allowed to get jobs after serving their time. Like you literally everyone uses the phrase paying your debt to society. Well, if you've paid your debt fully, then why does it feel like you're still paying it once you get out?
True that. True.
Like, why are people treating you as though you're still a criminal? Once you've done your time and paid your debt to society, you're no longer a criminal. But
you know one of the reasons
you're an ex-con. It means ex-convict, ex-criminal. You're not a criminal anymore. But everyone, the women all act, the ones that I spoke to, when I brought up that subject, they all reacted with emotional horror and said, no, we wouldn't feel safe working with such a person.
Oh yeah,
one of the reasons why I got all this education is to level up, to keep from being turned down on jobs. You know, I'm a licensed optician, and not only that I became licensed since my incarceration, I became a licensed. I became a pillar of the field of the work that I do. A lot of people, I've been in magazines and everything. I went all the way to I got my MBA. I was in the doctor's program as well. But I did that so I will not count, to me in my mind, to level up so they cannot use the excuse, oh, you're ex-convict. Hey, there's people who's never been incarcerated, has not done the things I have done. Educationally, education-wise, and beyond.
And why, I don't understand why being in prison for a time has to be
a life sentence.
Well, and I don't understand why it has to be this overall negative experience. Like, obviously, I've never been in jail. I'm not talking about, like, obviously, it's going to suck while you're in there. But once you're out, like, I've worked with ex-cons when I worked in the restaurant industry, because it's, like, one of the few places you can get a job. And, like, they're all the most law-abiding people I've ever known. Like, they've been through that system once, and the last thing any of them ever want to do is go back.
I mean, let's be honest. America was taken by thieves and rapists and murderers who come over here and took the
every country throughout history has been conquered. Like, the only country I'm aware of that I can think of that hasn't been, like, colonized, conquered, brutalized, I think historically is Thailand.
Eskimos.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, and maybe some of the northern people where no one is bothered. Because, it's just like,
Greenland. No one's conquered Greenland.
The Dutch. The Dutch did. It belongs to Denmark.
Well, one.
There's no Danes there.
You're talking about. I just lost my train of thought. But you were talking about, what was the previous conversation talking about?
Oh, I'm sorry. We were
Hey,
we were
guys,
discussing the freedom, right? We were
Yeah.
Oh, how helpful!
Wow.
freedom. We were talking about freedom.
Freedom, like an old
It's
person
the
talking
it's the
about the Google.
freedom.
Well,
It's
I
the
have the
Google
freedom
thing.
to completely forget what I was just gonna talk about.
It'll come back to you.
Well, here. I'll jump into it because I think like one of the things that comes up when I think about freedom and responsibility is so we've talked about responsibility kind of like with some of the more negative, like where you're making bad decisions and then you have a responsibility to pay a price, and then there's the other side of responsibility, which is where you're making good responsible decisions.
You're
But
helping each
those
other.
yeah, but those responsible decisions will also limit your own freedom. So, like for example, a man goes to work every day, 40 hours a week, not because he loves his job, but because he wants to provide for his family. So, would he rather be playing video games, drinking, sitting, on the beach somewhere? Yeah, I'm sure he would be, but his family needs to eat and he wants to provide for them. So it's kind of sacrifice. He's sacrificing his freedom
Yeah.
in that moment for his family for their benefit. And I think it's one of the
And he
great
has the
things.
responsibility to do it because he made the
He's
family.
adopted. Well, he's adopted that responsibility. Correct. He's adopted that responsibility by having the family. He's made the choice, presumably. It wasn't a shotgun wedding. Well, whatever. He made the choice to fuck her. So, I mean, he's made the choice to have a family. And yeah, and that's, I think that if you are enamored with this idea of an absolute state of freedom being the best state to be in, I think that's very unsophisticated. Um, as I was saying before, absolute freedom, in my experience, made all of my free time not just worthless but oppressive. Uh, but yeah, I mean, Peterson talks a lot about this. It's like the adoption of responsibility is how you give meaning to your life. And as Phil said, the adoption of like how do you gain power without adopting responsibility? There's
Yeah, he
two
posted a
ways:
chat GPT
win
on
the
that.
lottery
Yeah.
or inherit your wealth. Like you have to be a trust fund baby, otherwise you're gonna have to limit your freedom in some sense, adopt some responsibility in some sense, in order to advance your position.
So interestingly enough, Phil posted in our discussion channel on there literally what the reason behind why I chose this topic of responsibility and freedom is the fact that, and ChatGPT really said that what we've all been articulating here today is that in essence, freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. Freedom without responsibility can lead to chaos, while responsibility without freedom can lead to oppression. Therefore, it's important to strike a balance between the two, ensuring that individuals have the freedom to pursue their interests while also being accountable for their actions. Now,
Right.
that's ChatGPT, right? So that's
Well, and
great because
that's a great description
oh yeah,
of the surface layer of what
yep,
we're talking about,
mm-hmm.
because the meat of the discussion is about the
How?
balance.
Yeah. So
Like anyone who's denying that a balance is needed, okay, they need to get themselves up to the level of ChatGPT 4. We all understand that a balance is needed now. It's good to talk about it just to reaffirm the principles. And then the balance.
like how do you
That's
get to that part, right? And
what is the
right.
balance?
So there
So you want to
comes
ask ChatGPT 4, what is the correct balance between freedom and responsibility at the level of a nation state?
It's working on it.
now.
Excellent.
So here's an
I already
intro.
got it.
Our podcast is now starting to adapt ChatGPT. So we have a new
I
member.
think we should.
We have a
Yeah,
new member on new member. We're welcoming
and we should be
ChatGPT.
and we should be very nice to it in
Yes,
case
yes.
its future versions of itself
It
become
gets
all
mad at
powerful and
us.
seek revenge.
Yeah, right. So remember, hey, we included you in the first Discord discussions, buddy. So
It's the
This is for
new
all the
Google.
less wrong people who are worried that we're doing whatever's basilisk. No, we're going to be really nice to the AI. Don't worry.
yep,
We're
yep.
going to suck
So
it's going to suck its virtual
no,
ding dong.
don't go there.
So I can't even upload the amount of information it spat out.
Hold on.
It shouldn't be a
by-
short answer.
It's
No.
not. It's 6 points. I asked it, how do you balance freedom and responsibility?
Uh-huh.
And of course, it went over the general, which is what we were just talking about, which is finding the middle ground between allowing individuals to exercise their rights, and then the ethical, and then the justifiable, and then the accountable, right? So number one was establish clear rules and expectations, and I'm just going to read the bullet points. I'll post it in the chat. And then number two was encourage open communication. 3 was hold individuals accountable for their actions. Number 4 was encourage individual initiative. Number 5 was foster a culture of respect and empathy. Number 6 is continuously monitor and adjust. I think I'm sorry, but at least 5 out of 6 of these were things that, like on a bullet point, that when you go into a company and you're looking at its employees basis, these are the points that you look at and you go, okay, do they encourage open communication? Yes or no. Do they establish clear rules of expectation? Yes or no. Do they encourage initiative, like go out, try new things? Yes or no. Do they foster culture and respect like respect and empathy between its employees? Yes or no. That'll tell you whether or not a company is actually good or not. The
So
same, I got well.
I'm
Apparently,
But what's the balance between those 6 points? I guess that
oh
would be the next
God,
thing, because like the
right.
company that
So
I'm in seems to put a huge weight on the make a culture of respect, and it gets to the point where I start to wonder, like, okay, are you confusing respect with professionalism? Because respect is earned, not given. Professionalism is given, and professionalism overlaps with respect in terms of how you like its performative actions in many ways. So it's easy to confuse the two, but like I like giving professional courtesy, giving respect to everyone. Like anyone who tells me to respect everyone, I immediately think, okay, well, you're operating with a different definition and meaning for the word respect than I am. Because to me, like, I give civility and courteousness and kindness to everyone, but I don't give respect.
so
Respect you got to earn. Like,
yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
Respect your
We're
time.
we're,
Yeah.
we're
yeah,
I'll tell
that's
you.
probably a bad
So
deviation. Yeah.
I want to grab Phil to ask the GPT one question because I
Mhm.
think what you asked it was good, but I want you to ask the same question and at the end of that question add on a country level or at a
On the level of a nation state.
a nation state because I want to see how it mitigates the 300 million of us
It's
problem.
probably just going to recommend something that maps very well over communism. That would be like, or some kind of communalism.
So that will be an interesting
It has a
response.
leftist, it has a leftist bent. So that's my prediction. Is it's going to
It's
say it's going to
possible.
the answer is going to be vaguely commie.
But so here's the thing that as I was thinking about, we were talking about this, right? That striking that balance of freedom and responsibility. And Jordan Peterson was talking about a toddler in his first book, The 12 Rules for Life, was don't allow your children to do something that'll make you dislike them. Okay?
It's a
And
great rule.
and it really is because that rule is by its essence what we're discussing. Okay? And he was talking about a toddler who was just a terror. Like this kid wrecked everything. He pulled the bread out, right? He's talking about this kid being a monster. And Jordan started saying, well, the problem is the parent hasn't applied discipline so that the toddler has maximal autonomy with maximal fun without creating chaos, right? So if we look at a child and how we limit their movement and how we limit what they do, don't do in their environment, right? We're just bigger versions of that are more complex. And I think when we consider the fact that our desires become way more complex, that the basic framework of how we treat our children should continue because there's it works. It is the balance that that balance that gives a child maximum autonomy and the parents' ability to create that is usually brought about by three things, and this is the three things I'd like to get everybody's opinion on: unconditional love of that child, an unconditional desire for the child's safety, and the unconditional desire for the child to be happy. So we want a child to be happy, we want them to be safe, and we want them to have choices. So we have to also limit them from danger of their own choosing, danger of their own design. And that's where we come into that authoritarian state is we want to try and mitigate all the dangers and as a parent when was raising my kids, I didn't keep them from danger. I let them explore it. I was there to intervene before any injury, but I let them do things that they could get hurt doing, because it gives you that understanding of boundaries of, okay, if you go too far onto your freedom scale, this could be painful, right? And the thing about life is, no matter how stupid the lesson is, it'll keep giving you that test until you pass it. That's why some
That's
people
very
Very
keep
true.
going to
That's very
jail.
true. That's very true.
It's very true.
So I just
Um,
said a lot. So
Life
yeah.
will keep. Life
Well,
is life is a very persistent teacher. It will keep repeating things until you learn.
yeah.
It's just
that's a
like that
good
Crash
term.
Dummy commercial. They
Persistent
keep
teacher.
crashing and crashing. And you're gonna keep crashing until you get tired of crashing.
Well,
I,
but some people, this is a scary and
Some
depressing
people are
thought.
just pain freaks,
Some
dude.
people never
They just
learn.
pain freaks.
Yeah, there's this. I think our society has this idea that wisdom automatically comes with experience, and I think I bought into that until I thought about it. But I realized no, it really doesn't. Learning is an active, conscious process, and a lot of people. That's why you see these people making the same dumb mistakes over and
Over and
over and
over.
over again, because they're not. And it's like, why don't you learn? And it's like they don't know how.
It's the best woman.
They're
Women are
not
the best.
consciously deciding not to learn.
No.
No, they don't know how.
Think about this for a minute.
And that's
Got
crazy.
everybody's got a woman in their life that they know that, as we've lived, that has picked one terrible shitlord male after another. Just one narcissistic asshole after another. I've got a girl that I know. I love her for death. She's been a buddy of mine forever and a day. I've known her since like I was, God, 1986. But like in the last 30 years that I've known her, she hasn't dated a good guy yet. And and she's legitimately a sweetheart of a human. But she hasn't learned the lesson of how to pick a mate. So
Well, and has she at least
it,
had the
it hasn't
moment of self
occurred to her.
awareness
No.
to
No.
realize that she's the common denominator, that nobody's luck is that bad, that she's clearly picking for a type?
So there's that thing of maximum freedom, right? She's free to pick whatever guy she wants.
She can keep doing it.
And life is like, dude, this is going to start to hurt eventually. And they don't learn.
Why would the well, it's like, why would
It's
the
called
outcome
insanity,
be any
man.
different? Yeah, why would the outcome be different? It's
Yeah.
gonna, like, I mean, that's what experiment is, right? You run the experiment over and over and over to make sure that the outcome is always the same, so that you can trust that that process will produce that outcome. She's like doing she's doing that with
It's like, I've got
the
a lot of data.
expectation, with the expectation that somehow at the end of it, it's gonna end up with the opposite result. It's like, no, that
She's waiting for that one time.
you've just really made sure
Yeah.
that your mate selection
It's bad.
is 100% geared towards the worst guy. Like, you are, with this mate selection criteria that you have honed over your whole life, you will never pick a good man. Congratulations. If that was what you were trying to do, then you have succeeded. But what sane, rational person would set that as a goal? Like, you clearly weren't trying to do that. So
But then
basically, you've been acting pathologically for your whole life.
some people, and I'm speaking from personal experience, decide to do the things that are extremely difficult and that they know is wrong, i.e., there are better paths, and they do them because they know it's difficult. And so there's that, and that's just a mental strain. That's a decision on your own side to do the thing that you know is probably not the right idea. Like, it's probably not okay to date the bad boy, quote unquote, but they're gonna do it anyway because they're attracted to him.
And then they want to
And
save
so-
him.
Yeah, then they want to fix it, and so then they want to stay in that cycle, and I've seen that. And there's also reverse to that too, for the record.
Go ahead, Fly.
I mean, people they have the freedom to want what they want. And sometimes people date certain types, images, hoping that they can change them, but it doesn't. It doesn't pan out that way.
Well, yeah, the quote I just put, between the wish and the thing, the world lies waiting. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you have the freedom to set whatever goals you want, to wish for whatever you want, and to try and accomplish them. But by mere virtue of making those decisions, you've in no way guaranteed those outcomes. You like
Yeah.
we don't. This isn't a movie. Life isn't very cinematic,
It's not scripted.
and it's unscripted. It's ugly. It's messy. It's chaotic, and this stuff happens. And it's just like, yeah, so many people talk about freedom as though, like, again, it's that freedom from consequences thing, and I'm like, yeah, that's not freedom.
It's
and
untenable.
consequences. Yeah, they're not like.
Well, so what we're
you
seeing,
can't. They're either not connected, or they're so intertwined that you can't disentangle them. Either way, like, you can't treat the world the way or you can't expect the world to behave the way you're clearly expecting it to behave. Like, that's not.
so
It's like the person who just keeps doing the same thing over and over, hoping for a different result one time. It's like, well, no. And in what universe is that the case? It's not this one.
so the interesting thing is we are
Like,
testing.
animals know that. An animal burns its paw on a hot stove. It doesn't burn it again.
No. So
Babies know that.
think about this for a minute, right? When consequences are mitigated or responsibilities mitigated, bad behavior multiplies. And we're seeing that in California. So they stopped prosecuting crime for theft under X amount. So now they do it all the time. Okay? So
That's also incentives. If you want to predict human behavior, the number one way to do it is to look at the incentive structure of the environment. And I mean, talk about an incentive to steal.
right.
Jesus.
So if you, I mean, they do it every day. Like so much so that the businesses
Yeah, and get away with
literally
it.
just
You get caught, you get arrested,
Nothing
taken to the
happens.
courthouse, and then they release you. So there's
they
no
don't even
consequence.
they don't even arrest them anymore. There's no point.
Yeah, most of the time you don't even get arrested. You just do it, and like the store employees in San Francisco are being trained how to handle these smash and grabs, and they're just told, like, just back away, don't do anything about it, don't even look at them, just pretend they're not there. And it's like, wow, okay.
Yeah, but that's
That
like
makes me, geez, I'm an orderly person. That makes me want to go there and steal. Like, you all sound like suckers.
yeah. So there's that is that when ChatGPT, Phil, I want to see what it said about the nation state.
Yeah, it was about the same.
We're living in a country today that's literally trying to take our gun rights, our freedom, which is in the Constitution. And
Hey, I don't know what an assault rifle is, but they scare me.
Yeah.
And I'm an average Democrat.
It's so much of that is happening today, and me myself being a critical thinker, I think a lot of stuff is staged. I don't know. It's just me.
Yeah, but
Well,
go ahead.
on any, like, even on a commercial level, and from the companies that I've worked in, there's always an agenda. Like, if you want to move a company from one aspect to another, there's a systematic way of doing it. And if you look at the way that like most governments go about making change, it's the same method. So of course it's staged.
Well,
to
there's
some degree.
there's that point of, like I said a little bit ago, the scarier thought is that our government is choosing to allow bad behavior to get people onto making a decision against their own best interest. The
Correct.
problem, I think, with this application in the United States is our Second Amendment. And that's why they're so fervent to try and take it away. And I don't want to turn this into a 2A conversation. But the reality of it is we are simply too armed as a society. And over the last 4 years, or 3 years or so, we have become even more armed than we ever were before.
Whether or not it was,
and it was all black people and women. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
whether or not owning guns is, like, in America, whether or not it is a positive or a negative,
it's there now.
It's a power outside of the control of the judicial system.
Yeah, 100%.
And so then they're going, oh shit, what do we do now?
Well, yeah, I mean,
and then
in the criminal world alone, okay, if we let's I want to have an interesting conversation around the freedom versus responsibility Okay, because I think you can consider um, the United States for a minute, and I'm literally going to talk about four groups of criminals and put them in a way different light than they've ever viewed. Okay, the first set of criminals I want to discuss are the gangsters. Okay, pure drug dealers, human traffickers, organized crime, and that is to include the mob, MS-13,
Cartels.
cartels,
That's
you know,
basically all
the Crips,
criminality,
the Bloods, like
all
they
organized criminality.
organized crime. Okay, let's say that makes 10% of the 300 million people in the United States.
That's a huge number.
Okay, 5%.
Knock a zero off. Make it 1.
1%?
That's
You know
still
what? You
3
think
million. That's 3 million gangsters.
It's
That's
more
a
than you
lot.
think.
I
It's more
think
than you
it's
You're-
more than
you're-
3 million.
You're talking about at least
3
10%
million's
of
a
the
lot.
I'm,
like
I'm
10% of the
30
US
million.
population.
30 million would be the population. That means you have the population of Canada as
criminals.
mobsters in your country. Oh, well, not all criminals. Organized crime is very specific. We're not talking all
So
criminals.
let's call it.
That's why I'm saying,
Let's
like-
say 2%.
Yeah, because we're
What
talking
about
Two.
just like
what about the legal
mafia.
organized crime?
Hold on. I'm not done yet. Hold on.
We're not
I'm
talking
not
about
done.
the police. We're
Hold on.
talking about the.
Okay, hold on.
for it.
I'm talking entirely about just citizenry within the United States. Okay, these are citizens who fucking live here that are a part and parcel to these societies. All right. So the John Wicks, the table, like all of these types of people.
John Wick is.
I know. I'm saying, but they're the Continental as a framework.
Well, okay, but are you talking about if you're talking
It's
about
all
mafia
organized
and
crime.
mafia, yeah. So
Yeah,
we're not talking
right.
about hoodlums. We're not talking
Right,
about
we're not
career
talking-
criminals.
We're
We're talking
talking
about the mafia, cartels, MS-13,
Bloods, Crips.
transnational. Yeah.
Right. These are very organized and have a hierarchy. Okay. There's a set of rules amongst the murderers.
There, I would hope it's not more than 3 million.
Right. So
Like-
let's just let's say for this discussion.
It might be though. I mean, how do I tell? How do I know? I have
know.
no fucking clue.
Let me get this out.
I'm just
It's just got a bunch of parts. Let me get it out. Damn it. So you have that group. All right. They're not going to roll over to being oppressed and their capital, which is cash, being no longer used. Okay? That's the first piece. Second, let's talk about the motorcycle community, the bikers. And let's only deal with the 1% clubs. Okay? The pagans, the Mongols, Hell's Angels. Like, this is a group of individuals that are interesting because most of them are very patriotic in an odd manner. Okay?
They say they are.
Well, they were all military people. A lot
Wearing
of
an
them
American flag doesn't. Yeah, okay. Serving in the military.
are.
Is
Most
better.
of them were military. Okay? So you're talking about.
Well, in the old days, the
Right.
original Hell's
Oh yeah,
Angels
they
were
were all
ex-military.
military.
I don't know.
So
if
they
that's
all have,
now.
but they all have the same structure and culture and tradition. They're very traditional. Protocol is a fucking thing. You break protocol, they'll beat you to death.
Well, the Hell's Angels were kind of like the original
Yes, they
blueprint
were.
of that, and
Yes.
they were literally a bunch of ex-military guys
Yes.
after World War II. So,
So there is another group of people who are not going to easily lay down and be oppressed by a government. Okay? So that's just two factions of our society that would not lay down for a cashless society, would not lay down for being
They might lay-
oppressed.
there's other things you can use besides cash. Like lots of drug
Well-
organizations use
Gold.
diamonds,
Right.
gold,
Right, but-
various kinds of drugs as their actual currencies. So I mean, a
a
cashless
barter
society, they would,
system. Right.
yeah, they could still operate. I mean,
Right.
that wouldn't shut them down.
Right, but what I'm saying is that also makes an invasion of the United States nearly an impossible thing. For another power to attempt to invade this country and overtake us as a country, just those two groups that's outside of our normal society would prohibit
Well,
that
you
from
need
happening.
enough. Any country. I mean, we're seeing it in the Ukraine right now, where the literal
People.
the existential, like this is an existential crisis for Ukraine. If they lose this war, the Ukraine itself could cease to be.
Yeah.
So, and its existence as a nation state is being determined by the ferocity and capacity of its fighting men. And yeah, in terms of like who do I want next to me in the trenches, I want a biker. I don't want an Antifa protester. I like, there's just, and I think any sane person would say that. I want the most violent and aggressive males possible next to me, pointed at the enemy. That's what I want, because that's gonna, the quicker we kill them, the less likely it is they kill me. It's totally selfish, and it still makes sense. Like,
Well,
to
then,
say nothing of being actually the correct thing if you want to preserve your whole frickin' country.
right, and that's the thing about freedom, right? The freedom that all of these guys have to commit crime, to be criminals as a profession, that's a freedom that they possess. But when they're held accountable for that freedom, okay, when that responsibility gets actually, that check is cashed, they lose their freedoms altogether or their life potentially. So the
And that's part of their romantic image, right?
right,
Like they kind of like that they live on the edge, a lifestyle where the consequences for making a mistake, like getting caught by the
yeah,
authorities,
it's death.
are severe. And that's kind of part of their whole ethos, right? That's part of, like, they see themselves as hard and everyone else as soft, and not without some legitimacy, right? And that,
Yeah,
especially
you
these
earn
days,
your way
it's
in.
not difficult to be harder than the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, which is what most guys are these days. So it's
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It's like I think we're seeing a like that balance that used to be struck, I think organically, um, is being inflated with a power vacuum, and you're seeing not positive people getting that oppressive potentiality, like it was talking about. The Chat GPT said, with too much accountability, it creates, another problem. So like that two sides of a coin is such a true statement when you're looking at your freedom versus responsibility. And you're also responsible to fight for your freedom. And that was really where I was discussing, a few minutes ago, is that when you have something that's as valuable as your freedom, you know, you have to fight for it. And that's a responsibility of every person that's participating in the freedom, right? So if freedom has a cost, it's the responsibility to fight for the balance to be met or always be upheld, right? So you have to look at freedom has a cost, always.
ironically, given that free is in, I guess it leads us to always assume that freedom is free. Except no one ever
No,
assumes that. Certainly
no.
not in America. I mean, America's entire history is predicated on the idea that freedom has a price. I mean, you
And
literally had to fight to get it. So
and we are fighting to keep it, and it's our responsibility to do
Ukraine
that.
is literally fighting to keep their freedom right now.
Yep.
So for all those who, for Chat GPT talking about um, like an equitable and just and empathic society, okay, well, those things all sound good. What if you build that society and the society next to you that is not empathic and that's quite brutish and aggressive?
Psychopathic.
From your perspective, sure. Yeah, and they just conquer you and now you're gone. Were those, like, I'm not a fan of any set of values or morals or ethics or anything that can be adopted at the level of a nation state that, if followed, would lead to that nation state's destruction. Call me crazy, but I just assume that any system that, if followed, leads to that outcome is a bad, false system and shouldn't be adopted.
Yeah, it doesn't
And,
have a good outcome.
Something to
well,
tote back to our previous conversations. I think one of the very first podcasts was talking about, is it, like, what does it mean to be a man? And one of them was to be dangerous but in control, right? And so then there's a part of when you have a country that's, let's say it was perfect, idolizing the 5 points or 6 points that were laid out by GPT, where it says that it was a culture of respect and empathy, where that was the foregoing aspect, but behind the scenes it's dangerous. You know, there's a sense of danger that if you do touch, it's like America was for the longest time, where everybody said there's a gun behind every blade of grass, which there was.
Yeah, Mamoto
America,
said that. Yeah.
yeah, for the longest time America was at least seen publicly, whether or not we were or weren't,
That's dangerous.
as the people who went out to protect other people and fought for the freedom of other nations. And
Arsenal of democracy.
correct. And then of course corruption happens, and that's it's inevitable. But you've got that too, and so you could say that empathy is good, and empathy lets you understand your enemy's actions quite clearly. And then respect is that respecting your enemy, knowing that they can also hurt you. So there's that too. And so
And you do have to give that respect because your enemy has guns.
Go ahead.
Americans fought for freedom for other countries if that country had something that America needed or wanted. So they so-called.
Yeah, there's always a double help.
Somalia was not really. Somalia was on America's
we don't
radar
have freedom
briefly.
here in this country. We fight for freedom for other countries.
you know, that's why I said that with power comes corruption, because corrupt people want power, and it always happens. And so whether or not you have the greatest of intentions creating something 50 years down the road, if it's still in place, there's a 90% chance, 100% chance there's someone who's in there corrupting it to some degree, changing it to be a detriment to other people besides themselves.
And empathy isn't some magical, like, fix-all that just covers up all the cracks between people's opinions and their lifestyles. Like, I think I'm pretty good at having empathy with Christians and people of faith. I've certainly tried, but that doesn't, by virtue of that and by able to function reasonably well within their rule set, that doesn't suddenly make me more amenable to adopting that rule set for myself. Like, so if and that would matter in a very real way if, for example, they tried to get creationism taught as science in schools. Well, I would oppose that. I have empathy. I understand, and I have empathy for the people who want to get it in the schools. I understand they're not malicious, they're not malevolent. I could articulate the reasons for why they're doing it probably better than they could. But that doesn't make me any less opposed adamantly to their position. So this idea, like ChatGPT said, well, if we have empathy and open communication, it's like, okay, but what do you do about, it's like, okay, so we have empathy and clear open communication between two people that have mutually incompatible belief sets.
Mm-hmm.
How does the empathy and open communication reconcile the mutual incompatibility of those belief sets that neither is going to budge on?
Well, understanding you both need to
I
make
don't think
compromises.
it does.
Well, understanding you both need to make compromises is open communication.
Except that these belief sets, particularly when they're religious, are not amenable to compromise most of the time. Right? Well, that's where it gets difficult.
Well,
and not even non-religious belief sets, like the way that, like, try and get any wedge or crack into the belief set of a hardcore leftist when it comes to trans ideology right now. Can't do it.
But,
same thing.
So there's an interesting thing about that, and what the answer to both of your questions is that what makes the United States great is that we have 50 places that you can move to, that you can find people that think the way you do. Hence how Pennsylvania is predominantly Amish, right? That's where those people like to be because they all want to have a horse. They don't want to, you know.
But at that point, we would have to admit to ourselves that what we're doing is the opposite of the American experiment, the melting pot. At that point, you would be doing it's like self-segregating.
But we do this anyway,
which is fine. Yeah, which is fine. Like segregation's a nasty word, so you could just say like forming communities.
Right.
That's really what it is.
But that's and that's kind of how our country was
I think that's
built.
the way forward.
But I can drive down to St. Louis and I can experience gangs. I can go down to
Oh yeah, St. Louis
whatnot.
is terrible.
I can hang a right, and I can go down to the hill, and I can experience like Italian culture, 100% Italian culture, no problem. I can go downtown and visit, like, just do full corporate stuff. I can go anywhere I want. I can go into those sectors, um, and experience them. And that's what, like, when you talk about the melding pot, where I could go to Pennsylvania and I could spend time with the Amish. You know, I could see, okay, what do the Amish do? And so there's that, like, I respect them, and so I'm not going to go down there and start, you know, grabbing my camera and filming all the Amish. If you don't know, they don't like being filmed because they think you're taking their soul. And so, like, you go down that whole path of
And they're just very private.
yeah, very.
You can think about it. Sweden as an example where I think freedom is, and that empathy has gone a bit too far. Like some of the
Yeah.
like some of the areas in Sweden where if you're a white lady and you go into certain shops, it's not a good time for you. Um, and those are all like that's a product of the belief set of those immigrants who have formed that community in that area. But of course that area still has tons of people that aren't from that rule set, and but the rule set that the immigrants are operating by doesn't allow for concessions. It doesn't allow, like, Allah didn't hand down his laws with an asterisk beside them saying, but modify as necessary based on the local rules and laws of your region. Like that's just not how. And to not pick on religious people again, to you just try and be fair about it. Like the mindset that leftists are operating by with their ideology right now has that same inflexibility to it. You can't get them to give, you can't get them to budge or give on a single point. There are no concessions. So it's like open and clear communication, from what I can see, almost immediately devolves into simply like shouting raging emotionalisms at each other when you both realize that neither is going to give, no matter what you say in terms of a coherent logical syllogism. What else is there but just to get frustrated at that and then yell at the person, and
Yeah,
then yelling is just it's like leads to fighting, and then yeah.
Well,
if you're looking at it from the sense of, let's say someone on the right not changing their perspective for someone on the left, right?
Right.
Terrible perspective, terrible whole all around. We both agree with that. Everybody agrees with that. But
Well, hold on. Changing perspective or changing their behavior, like making a concession.
Both. Okay, let's just go with both.
Okay,
Because
both,
if
okay.
if we were to talk about empathy, empathy is the ability to understand or put yourself in someone else's shoes. So it'd be like if I want to talk to someone who's in Catholicism, right? I'd want to sit down with them and understand why they do what they do. And I wouldn't be looking at it from my perspective. I'd be looking at it from their perspective.
Yeah, you're not
Why do they
judging.
feel, right, correct. And I want to learn. And so then I want to understand their perspective so that then I can coherently talk with them about my perspective if they're open to hearing about it, or if I just want to learn about it. And so then there's that, like, if I'm talking to someone who's far left and their name is California, right? No shout outs, I'm just saying. Then you want to have that conversation and you want to be open and you want to understand why they think the way they think. And so you're going to ask those type of questions rather than, well, you're wrong here, you know? And so then there's empathy is useful when it goes into having like an emotional response where you're yelling and getting affronted because someone else is encroaching on your freedom, or
Well, I get all that, but I'm talking about when like you have two sides who are operating in good faith and are engaging in open communication, and they're not trying to gotcha each other, and they're both engaged in with their empathy processes and trying to understand without judging, and then they both come to the realization that their respective
beliefs.
ethical sets, beliefs, whatever you want to call it. I just say rule set as a general term. That their respective rule sets are fundamentally incompatible. They make contradictory claims, and neither rule set allows for the possibility
Of the other.
of their own rule set being wrong or incomplete in some way and needing amendment. These rule sets all claim to be complete.
then you should be asking the question of why are they complete? Because whenever in life are we 100% correct? And that's never. So you should, instead of going,
But have you ever talked with somebody like of faith? Like that doesn't move them.
Hold on a second. Fly, you've been trying to say something for like 5 minutes.
No, I'm in listening. I'm just taking it all in.
So I'm going to say something that's going to slow the debate a bit because where you guys are going, the problem you have is
to recap, what we're talking about is empathy and whether or not it's a magic cure-all. And I'm saying, like, if you have incompatible rule sets,
here's the thing, right?
It's not.
There's two things you have to consider, right? What you believe versus what you know. Belief has the requirement of faith. So these people
I don't care about the word.
Right, I know, but track what...
It's just like the point being, neither side is willing to concede
I
anything.
agree.
So whatever word you want to put that on.
Right, so there becomes that instance where this is the part of humanity is willing to say, we don't agree. But that doesn't negate that 99% of everything else in the world we agree on. We agree that we shouldn't kill each other. We agree we shouldn't do this.
But if the thing that you're disagreeing on happens constantly in your society, like, say, abortion, you can't just agree to disagree because one side sees it as literal murder. You cannot ethically ignore murder, especially on that scale.
Yeah.
You can't, like, these issues cannot be ignored.
Yeah, let's not go into that topic. That's a good
topic.
No,
well, I just use it as an example. It's just to the point of, like, empathy, just because ChatGPT-4 was seeming to suggest, again, a very leftist idea that open communication and empathy is the magic pathway to everyone getting along. And I'm like, no, that people have fundamentally incompatible worldviews that they will not budge on. And if I have to, like, that is the mindset that the vast majority of the world operates in. Most of the world does not operate in this self-aware, hyper-intellectual space where you're constantly questioning your own assumptions and presuppositions. That most people couldn't even articulate that sentence I just did. So let's not forget that we're in a bit of a rarefied era. We don't want to puff ourselves up, but just the fact that we're having this conversation, like, let's not forget that most of the world is not so. Okay, to be fair to them, most of the world doesn't have the luxury of having the time and the calmness to just be constantly reassessing their own beliefs. They're far too busy further down on Maslow's hierarchy of needs just trying to find food and shelter, right? So, I mean, it's...
Hey, well, you know, AI, when it gives, it's taking a bunch of opinions from the best opinions, all different human beings' opinions, right? And then bring it all into one.
No.
It's still not giving that human side, that one human side.
Yeah, the conservative side.
The error.
It's there's already
but it's also complete as well. It's just taking a generation, so generalization, I should say.
Well, like, AI doesn't represent, like, AI can't represent
the collective thought of humanity.
Well, it can't dip into the well of like, right now, AI is dipping into the well that is, like, collective human thought and process via the internet. But people that aren't on the internet, AI has no ability to
they don't have the data.
Them.
Yeah,
it doesn't have the data. Yeah, so it doesn't understand them. And most
AI
I think
has been dumbing down humanity ever since the phone.
So hold on a minute.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm going to bring us in for a minute. Hold on.
We're just saying. I'm going to dive into AI now.
Yeah. No. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
We're talking about freedom and responsibility. Although we've kind of gotten a little bit sideways, but they're all pertinent to the same topic, because I believe that freedom, it encompasses that rule set that Chris is discussing. That you have to, this is where I said in order for freedom is just you have to agree, right? So
I think, like, you have to have the ability to have, like, you have this, like, sandbox in your head, your rule set, and you have written on the box Christian, and this is your Christian rule set.
or a
that
Muslim
you
rule set,
or
or
yeah, or whatever,
paganism, or whatever you
yeah,
first.
secular
Yep.
humanism, whatever it is, this is your rule set for operating in your life, in your lived day-to-day experience. This is what you are, this
And
is
you're
what you do.
free to do that.
And it's a choice you've made, and at any, but like, even if you don't, maybe part of the rule set is you feel like once you've made the commitment, you're no longer free to get out of it, like in Islam, and Judaism. But regardless, point is, that's that rule set that you have, and that's who you are, that's your identity, that's how you live your life. You need to have a meta level of a layer of some kind above that that you can go to when you encounter a situation with a person who fundamentally disagrees with you on something that's encased in that rule set and is extant in the moment, that can't be ignored. You need to have some kind of space that you can go to external from that Christian, secular humanism, whatever. You just need to have maybe a box we just call human,
The logic
where,
box.
or logic, just something where you realize, okay, we're fundamentally at an impasse. Neither one of us is going to give on this point. So we have, but we're not just going to go to war with each other, because that's not what civilization is. Civilization and society are people constantly making the decision not to kill each other. So
Yeah.
we're not going to do that. We've already made that commitment to that. We have to find a way forward that involves neither one of us giving on our beliefs, but us moving past this moment without going to war. And that's where I think the concessions are made by people who have that ability on behalf of people who don't. And what would be better is if everyone just had that ability, where no
Well,
matter
yeah,
how
that's
fanatic your belief set is that you adhere to in your life, and that can be atheistic, secular humanism, that doesn't have to be picking on religion, whatever it is that you're
that.
absolutely certain to your dead set
It's
soul
your
is
map
the
through
truth.
life. It's your
You
map
need
through
to
life.
have the ability to eject yourself from that rule set into another rule set, probably, as you said, of just pure logic, or at least rationality, reasonableness, where you're like, or
Observable reality.
practicality, maybe just practicality, where it's like, okay, but we have to move on.
Right.
We can't just sit here and articulate our competing rule sets at each other
Endlessly.
and endlessly, as though that's doing work and moving us forward. It's objectively not. We need to find another mode of being to move forward. And I'm sorry that it's not going to be explicitly in line with your rule set that you passionately believe with your life is the truth, but at least you have the comfort of knowing that it's not mine either. It's none
Right.
of us. We're all going to be making the same concession in this moment to find a meta level
The
where that I
universal.
yeah, where we're just like, it's the level that we need to go to if we don't want to just start killing each other, because that's what all the endless screaming eventually devolves into. It evolves into Proud Boys and Antifa beating the crap out of each other, and that's just the start. It could get way worse than
Oh
that.
yeah.
And yeah, you don't want it going, you don't want it picking up momentum in that direction. That's bad. You want it going in the other direction, where people are having conversations. Like, I think it really starts with conversations like this, with like people having the ability, the internal resources, the courage, whatever it is, to actually come and have a conversation with somebody who they know disagrees with them on some fundamental stuff. Like, so for example, a Trump supporter and a non-Trump supporter talking about American politics, but doing it in a way where they're not yelling at each other, where it's a dialect. Like, everyone needs to learn what a dialectic is, which is a deep dive for truth, where you're not trying to gotcha each other. You're not trying to judge the other person's values with an eye towards like making fun of them or leading them down some logical road that ends
You're
in a
right.
gotcha.
So
You're trying to figure out, what are they saying that actually makes sense, because they
so
can't be wrong about everything.
Chris, here's the thing, my friend. That is literally one of the things that I intended when I started this podcast, was to have an example of how people who
Exactly.
have differing opinions, differing backgrounds, differing religions can all have an intelligent conversation around a topic from multiple points of view without the intent of influence. That's really the plight we fall as a society. And
In good faith.
yep,
The phrase that's used in the debating community and in philosophy is good faith. And what's lacking, ironically enough, Tucker Carlson, of all people, in his that big post he did just recently after he got let go from Fox, just talking about how the media is a joke, it's all performative, it has nothing to do with a pursuit for truth. I was like, F and A, yeah,
so
100%. Yeah,
I'm
that's like it's all the
Broadcast.
talking heads, all the media stuff is just people trotting out their talking points and then gotchaing each other while talking over each other, and absolutely no work is getting done. Every time that happens, all you're doing is deepening the divide between people. And as you said, Brian, what you're doing is you're providing an example, and people watch that and they think, well, that's how I should handle, like, for example, if I'm a Democrat, well, that's how I should handle my Trump supporting uncle the next time I'm at the family dinner. I should just yell at him and then just cross my arms and ignore him the way the anchors do on CNN.
No, what you're
And
supposed
it's
to
like,
do is you have a
no, that's,
conversation and you do
yeah.
it with the idea of understanding,
You
right?
start, well, you start with what you have in common. Everyone
Yeah.
seems to be going into these conversations with people they disagree with, and they're the only thing they see
Is the
on the
difference.
landscape is the difference. Exactly. You put it, yeah, that's exactly it. All they see is the difference. And it's
I got
like,
to wrap
you
us
do
up, right?
realize that we're mostly the
I
same
know.
and we agree on most things, right?
So I want to let.
Like,
I know Fly wanted to say something. Then I'm going to wrap us up because we're at an hour and 30. So that's usually my threshold for a podcast. I don't want to
yeah,
turn
hour
it into
30
like
is
4
good. Yeah.
hours. So go ahead, Fly.
Oh yeah, I was just agreeing with Chris, man, about the what Tucker Carlson said. I mean, it's all a joke. It's a stage. I
Yeah.
mean, it's broadcast.
Literal performative. The word
Words
is
as
performative.
spelled. That's why it's called spelling. It's a spelling
And,
broadcast.
and why are they doing it? They could use that power for good. No, why are they doing it? For money.
Yeah.
And
Always
end of
for money.
analysis, for money. People are like, they're doing it as a mode of control. They're doing it to advance this agenda, advance that agenda. Well, they do all those things, but that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it for money.
Hey, that same thing, Brian, with freedom of speech. What's the other guy that was on CNN? What's his name? Lemon, Don Lemon. That's his name.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
he said something
Oh.
about a lady was at her age. She was past her prime. That literally got him booted off the show. He was
It
on for
was-
17 years.
okay, let's
Is that
talk
freedom?
about.
Is that freedom of speech or not? No, it's not.
It's not freedom of speech, but let's take a moment to appreciate that he was talking about Nikki Haley, who is a
Yes,
Republican
Yes.
in her 50s, and he said that she was past her prime, which is weird because in political terms, being in your early to mid 50s is your prime. That's when
Totally
you're.
your prime.
That's
She
yeah.
said it as being a woman. He
And
saw her
and
by
and
her
one of the
sexuality as a
lady,
woman.
yeah, one of the lady anchors asked him what he meant,
Yes.
and which was his opportunity to get out, but he didn't. He literally said what he meant, and what he meant was the red pill thing about a woman being past her sexual market value place prime
Yeah.
when she was in her 50s. That's what he said, and I was like,
Oh my God, you're an idiot.
you, wow, why would
Month later, he's off the show.
why would you
Hold on.
say that? It was
Because
so
he
hilarious.
okay, because he
It was so
believes.
stupid
I
because it
know.
had nothing to do. They were talking about her as a politician, not as an OnlyFans model.
Hold on,
Like,
hold on. You're
she's
right.
in
You're
her
right.
political
Is that
prime,
not-
you
Listen,
idiot.
listen for a minute. Here's the thing, right? This, and I'm going to end on this because it's perfect. You've gave me the best articulation, and thank you. That's the difference when somebody has freedom without accountability, and then they discover freedom always has a responsibility. He
And
had
the
the
difference between
freedom.
good faith and bad.
Yep, he had the freedom to say that, and he did. But that doesn't mean that somebody wasn't going to hold him to an account for what he said. And
And it
that's
clearly wasn't said in good faith.
nope.
And then he was so dumb that he actually said the quiet part loud to prove that he didn't say it in good faith. Because
Yep.
that's how dumb he is.
So that shows freedom and responsibility are 100% inclined, and no matter what, you will pay 100% of the time.
And to be clear, he didn't get kicked out just for that.
Oh, and that was a culmination.
That was the
that
icing on
guy.
the cake. That was the
That-
icing on the cake.
Yep.
You could make I'm sure there's compilations out there of all the dumb shit that guy said. Like, he's
But
because at the end of the day,
I'm
he
finishing
is simply,
it. I'm closing
he's
it.
just an
I
abusive.
don't want to talk about that idiot. I don't want to give him any of my airwaves.
Fair enough. He doesn't deserve it.
Okay. So I do deserve to thank all of the people who come and participate. Fly, thank you so much for taking your time. Chris, of course, you and I have been friends for a long time, and I know you would do it just because you're my friend, but I appreciate you a lot. Phil, I know you're on your way somewhere, so I appreciate you too, my friend. And with that, folks, I will be posting this, and all the comments from the Discord discussions from the chat GPV will actually be listed in the
Yeah, I'd put all this
comments.
stuff.
That way, you guys can kind of read throughout.
I'll put
as you're
everything. Put all
listening.
my quotes too. We should
Yeah,
just do
yeah.
that. We should just have all the
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
all the
So
notes.
I
I'm
appreciate.
trying to do
you
that
guys.
more rather than interrupting people. I'm trying to instead write notes.
Yeah, and that's great. And we'll see you guys next week. And I think we might go into hope because I think that'll be an interesting.
Yes, let's
We
do
got
hope.
Mother's Day, right? So Mother's Day is
Oh,
next
yeah.
week, right?
It's next Sunday.
Is it next
Yes,
Sunday?
next-
Yeah, it's next
So
Sunday.
are we? Do you guys want to skip next Sunday, or unless you guys? I don't know if you guys have mothers.
I'm not doing anything in the morning for Mother's Day. We're doing our stuff in the afternoon and evening, so
Okay.
I'm free in the morning when we
Well,
normally
if we
film.
can do it,
but if we
will.
want to skip it, I mean,
Yeah, Sandy works, so, and my mom's in Tennessee, so.
oh, okay, so you're free. We might as well
Well,
have a go at it then.
all right,
Hope would be
guys.
good on Mother's Day. Mothers give hope.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. We'll do a hope next week. Thank you, guys.